the truth about things in life is a big deal, don't you think? I do. You know, Jesus told the disciples and those listening to him that the truth would make them free in John 8:32. So I want to be free. Don't you? How do we find this truth? We're talking about the truth in life. Welcome to Faith and Culture. I'm Catherine Camp, and this is episode 2, Seeking Truth. I'll be giving you plenty of tools to work with on seeking truth and how to know the difference between truth and propaganda. So let's get started. What is true for you may not be true for me. How many times have you heard this statement? I've heard it far too many times. And frankly, it makes me sick because it shows a great deal of ignorance. You see, this is what is known as relativistic thought. Relativistic thought is unsustainable. And that's our first lesson today. It cannot be sustained. Number 2, truth should always be based on facts. So if you have relativistic thought, you don't really have to base anything on facts, which means it probably doesn't correspond to reality, only your feelings. So let's talk about truth and what are the boundaries here. How do we know what truth is? Truth exists in the mind, all right? When the mind agrees with and conforms to or corresponds to that specific reality. If it doesn't correspond to reality, it's not true. It's just something someone made up, or it's something someone heard that they still can't back up and prove. This is a big deal, especially if someone places their entire understanding of life on something that is false. And that's what most people are doing in our culture today. There is a reality that is independent of the mind. And that reality is the truth. In other words, if people are believing that there are many gods, or if there are many ways to God, that's just not the truth. Where are they getting that information? In their hearts? In their minds? Wherever they're getting it from, they have nothing to back it up with. So another problem is when you do have a set of facts, for instance. So what happens when people interpret the facts differently? We see this a lot in science. Unfortunately, interpretation will inevitably be based on a person's worldview. So if you are a naturalist and you're looking at a scientific finding, you're going to naturally assume that evolution came to this conclusion. But if you are looking at it in awe and in real questioning mode, you're going to want to know, how did it get that way? You're not going to just believe a theory. You're going to want to find facts. Also, in information propaganda, CNN has a mural in their Atlanta headquarters that states, it's a huge mural on the wall, and it says, just because we report our opinions doesn't change the facts. No, it doesn't change the facts. They've got that right. But what it does change is the way people hear the facts based on someone's opinion that has a spin on the facts. So it distorts the truth. That is called propaganda. See, what they're talking about does not correspond to reality. It corresponds to their distortion of reality. And without a correspondence view of truth, factual communications break down. Another important thing to do is listen for the assertions that people are making. The assertion must be taken to its logical conclusion. For instance, the statement, and you may have heard this so many times, but put it into practice. If someone says there is no absolute truth, that in itself is an absolute statement. They're already contradicting themselves by making that statement. If there is no truth, then that means there are no lies. We could not have a civilization living that way. The implications of relativism become a problem because no truth, then no lies. Truth then becomes relative to time and space. In other words, just because people used to think that the world was flat didn't make it flat. It was always round or spherical, whatever you want to say. Anyhow, truth also becomes individualized. If you remember in the Kavanaugh hearings, the woman accusing the judge said that was her truth, but it didn't make it true just because it was in her mind. There would be no mistakes. You could never make a mistake if there's nothing to base a standard for truth on. At this point, learning would not be possible. Then nothing could be true. When it comes to ultimate truth, mind you, about our origins and purpose, relativism leads to universalism. You may go to a church, and I'm not trying to offend you, but you may go somewhere that says there are many paths to heaven. That is not what it says in the Bible. And you have to believe either one way or the other. So you have to have a correspondence view of truth for any learning to take place. So, let's practice and talk about engaging our culture with what we've just learned. All right, so looking at testing for truth, there are 5 tests for truth. We're going to use the science of epistemology. That means, how do we know what we know? How does our brain think? How do we gather information? We're going to look at the law of causality, okay, cause and effect, what caused this. The law of non-contradiction, is what a person is saying contradicting itself? The basic sense of basic reliability of sense perception. We perceive well, but we don't perceive perfectly. And we need to take into consideration the analogical use of language, which is what we talked about in episode 1. All right, understanding absolute truth. You do not have to have evidence in order for absolute truth to exist. Let me restate that. You don't have to have absolute evidence in order for absolute truth to exist. You may not have all the pieces, but the vast majority of evidence and facts are looking that way. Borderline conditions do not make truth relative. That's really important to understand because there will be several borderline conditions. Another thing, claiming to believe something is true is not the same as a truth claim. That's different. So when you're talking to someone, they may be claiming something, but it doesn't mean that it's a truth claim. We need to find out where they're coming from, where each other is coming from. So testing for truth, remember that unaffirmability tests for falsity. Self-defeating claims are something we need to listen for. When someone says, for instance, I cannot think, well, they're thinking when they're saying that. There's also flawed reasoning. I know that no one can know anything about reality. That is a very mixed up assertion, because that person is claiming to know everything about reality in order to even make that claim. So remember, unaffirmability can falsify a worldview, and undeniability can verify a worldview. If someone cannot produce facts or evidence to even start towards what they are claiming as a truth claim, then they cannot affirm their worldview. Relative thought is inevitably self-destructive. Always. It is. So, what we need to do is listen for self-destructive claims. In the act of making any truth claim or statement, in the process of making any truth claim or statement, as the basis for making any truth claim or statement. Most important thing here, what I'm suggesting, is to listen. We have to be really good listeners. The goal is to expose inadequate reasons for why people believe what they believe. We have to explain how we know what we know using the tools of epistemology. Remember, epistemology is how does a person know what they know? It's the study of knowledge. How do we gather knowledge? How does a person come to a conclusion of the statements that they're making? If they are a naturalist, we want to find out, okay, want to know, how are you coming to your conclusions that there is no God? Is it because somebody made you mad in church 10 years ago or when you were a kid? You know, there are lots of boundaries that people have that keep them from coming back to the Christian faith or coming at all. We also need to take into consider the law of causality, the law of non-contradiction. Remember, the basic sense of perception and the analogical use of language. Truth, in the end, is undeniable. It's absolute. It will always correspond to reality and can be applied to a worldview. Join me next time when we talk about truth and ideologies, because there's a difference. Until then, if you've gotten any value out of this, please press the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, ring the bell so that you'll know when our next episode comes out. And until then, bye for now.